Okay guys, here we are factoring trinomials. Now, we've learned that trinomials are three math terms. 1, 2, 3. Okay, tri means three, factoring trinomials. Okay, when we talk about factoring, what you need to remember is what we're trying to do is break down the math term in the smallest math terms possible. So, for an example, if we have 18, how could I break down 18 in the smallest math terms possible? Well, I know that 2 and 9 multiply to give me 18. Okay? But 2 is the smallest because 2 only breaks down into 1 and 2. This is a prime number, right? 2 is a prime number. The only number that divides evenly into it is 2 itself and 1. But 9 is not a prime number because we've got 3 times 3. Now I've got all prime numbers. Okay, so I have effectively factored 18 into 2 times 3 times 3. That's how I've factored 18 because I've got all prime numbers. There's nothing more I can do to factor those numbers. That's what we are doing with a trinomial. We're taking this math expression and breaking it down into the smallest terms possible where they can no longer be broken down. Okay, these are the steps to do that, and we'll take this one first. So when I first check for my greatest common factor, that is the term, that is the number that divides equally into each integer, meaning each number into, oh, I put an extra R in there, integer. So, is there a greatest common factor here? Is there a number that divides equally into 5, 11, and 2? So after determining that there's no greatest common factor, I create my x, and I put my a times my c term up here, and my b term here. So this is ax squared plus bx plus c. So my a term is the number in front of this squared variable. My b term is the number in front of the r variable or the x variable, and my c is my last term. So a times c would be 5 times 2, which equals 10. B would be 11. And this would be positive, this would be positive. So then I'm going to ask, what factors multiply to give me 10 and add to give me 11? My dog's in here, so that's who's crying in the background. Okay, so what two numbers multiply to give me 10? 1 and 10. And I know that both are going to be positive because these are all positive numbers. Positive, positive. So both of my factors are going to be positive. And 2 times 5. No other numbers multiply to give me 10. So we put my two factors here and here. Then I'm going to take my r plus 2 and r plus 5. And I'm getting my 2 from here and my 5 from here. So now what I've said is I've kind of broken those down into two numbers that, or two math terms that would multiply, except I have this 5 here. Since I have that 5, I need to divide both terms by the 5 to make it accurate. When I divide r plus 5 divided by 5, I'm left with r plus 1, right? Because 5 divided by 5 is 1. However, 2 divided by 5 is not going to be even. So I take my 5 and it stays in front of my r term. So I've got 5r plus 2 times r plus 1. So essentially, these have become the two factors that when I multiply them together, I will get this. Okay? There we have that. Moving on. Now I'm going to do one with the negative sign. So we've got, I'm going to look, is there a greatest common factor? I don't see a greatest common factor. 5 goes into 5 ones. It does not go into 23 evenly. It does go into 10, but it has to go into all 3 evenly. So I'm going to create my x, and I'm going to do a times c, which is negative 50. Then my b value is 23. So I need to figure out what two numbers multiply to give me negative 50 and add to give me 23. One thing I notice is that it's a positive 23. And since this is a negative 50, I know that one of my numbers, one of my factors of 50 have to be negative and the other one's going to be positive. Because a positive times a negative is a negative, which is what I want. But I'm also noticing that this is 23, which is positive. So my bigger number must be positive and my smaller number is going to be negative. So when I start looking at the factors of 50 and adding them up to 23, what am I going to look at? Well, I know that 1 and 50 multiply to give me 50. I know 2 and 25 and 5 and 10. So of these three, what is going to add up to give me 23? Well, if my bigger number is positive and my smaller number is negative, when I add 25 to negative 2, I'll end up with 23. So that's going to be it. So I've got negative 2 and positive 25. So then I'm going to take my x minus my 2 and x plus 25. I'm just literally taking them just as they are right here. So negative 2 and positive 25. But I'm going to have to divide by my a. So divide by my a. In this one, 2 divided by 5 is not going to be equal. So I move my 5 to the side, 5x minus 2. Then 25 divided by 5 is even, so I get x plus 5. So what I'm finding is that these factors, these two numbers, these two binomials, when multiplied together, give me this trinomial. And I cannot factor anything more out of these two because there's no common numbers in either one of those. Okay, let's do one with the greatest common factor. How about this one here? Number with 12x squared minus 33x. It has both a greatest common factor and a negative. So, what's my GCF? What's the number that's going to multiply into all three of those evenly? Well, I know that 2 goes into 12, but 2 will not go into 33. Even though it goes into 18, it needs to go in all three. And yet 3 goes into 12, 3 goes into 33, 3 goes into 18. So 3 is going to be my greatest common factor. So when I take out 3, I'm left with 4x squared minus 11x plus 6. And you see that if I were to divide that 3 back up, then it would give me this answer, right? So that's no different than when we're out here looking at. So after I've taken the greatest common factor out, now I'm going to look at this trinomial and say, is there any way I can break it down even further? I've taken one number out, just like we did with 18. We broke that down into 2 and 9. So now I'm like looking at the 9 saying, can we break that down further? I'm looking at this saying, can we break this down further? And I'm going to say, well, I know the way I can find out is by putting it in my x and putting at the top my a times my c. 4 times 6 is 24. The b goes down here, negative 11. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, I need two numbers that multiply to give me positive 24 and add to give me negative 11. A negative times a negative I know is a positive, and this is a negative, which means I know that both of my factors of 24 have to be negative because they have to combine to be a negative number and multiply to be a positive number. So what two numbers do I know that multiply up to 24? Well, one way I can do that is plug that into my calculator and go to my y equals 24 divided by x and go to my table and look and say, all right, I've got 1 and 24, 2 and 12. I'm looking right here. When one number is 1, the other is 24. When one number is 2, the other number is 12. 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. And then it starts to repeat, 6 and 4, so I don't have to rewrite these again. So I know both of them are going to be negative, and here are my factors. Which of these, when I add them together, are going to give me 11? 1 and 24, no. 12 and 2, that would give me negative 14. Negative 3 and negative 8, yes, that would give me negative 11. So I'm going to put 3 and 8, but they're both going to be negative. So then when I put it into my factored form, x minus 3, x minus 8, now I have to divide by my a. But I'm not going to use this a because I've already factored out a 3. I'm using this a because I'm totally working with this equation right now. So I'm going to divide by 4, and I'd be left with x minus 3 over 4 is not going to be an even number, so I have to move my 4 in front of my x to get 4x minus 3. I'm running out of room. 8 divided by 4 is positive, or is a whole number, which is 2. So I get 4x minus 3 here, x minus 2 here. However, I don't want to forget about this 3 that I factored out initially. That comes into the problem. These are the 3 math terms that, when multiplied, give me this. Does that make sense? We're breaking it down to the smallest form. This is a 4. All right? Okay. Here, the area of a rectangle is this trinomial. Find the length and the width. So if I know that the area of the rectangle is this, I know that the formula for the area is length times width. So it's basically saying, what two factors multiply to give me this? Well, you need to use your X to figure out what two numbers are going to give you that. My A would be 1. My C would be negative 54. My B would be negative 3. Again, we have a negative, so we know at least one number is going to be negative. This is also a negative. What times a negative gives you a positive, or sorry, what times a negative gives you a negative number? A positive number. So we know one's going to be negative and one's going to be positive. Then, since I look at here, since that one's negative, I know that the bigger number has to be negative and the smaller number has to be positive. Right? So, when I think about 54, again, if you want to use your calculator, just put in your y equals, put in 54 divided by x, go to your table, and there are all your terms. I know my bigger number has to be negative, so I'm going to put 54 and positive 1, 27 and positive 2, negative 18 and positive 3. That has a decimal point, so I'm not going to worry about that one. 5 has a decimal point. I'm not going to worry about that one. And then 9 and 6. But I know my bigger number has to be negative and my smaller number has to be positive. And then I think it just starts repeating each other, 9 and 6. So what of these, if these are all negative, these are all positive, is going to give me negative 3, negative 9, and positive 6. If this is negative, you know your bigger number has to be negative. If this is negative, you know you're going to have one positive, one negative. All right, so we get x minus 9, x plus 6 is the area. I divide by my 1. I'm left with the same answer. However, which one's the length and which one's the width? Well, we know that length is bigger in a triangle and width is smaller. Which of these numbers would be bigger, which would be smaller? Well, let's just throw a random number in for x. If x was 20, 20 minus 9 would give us 11. 20 plus 6 would give us 26. So anytime you're adding something to x, you're going to have this be your bigger, this one be your smaller. So your width would be x minus 9. Your length would be x plus 6. And that is just where common sense has to come in, and you have to think about which of these makes sense. You know length of a rectangle is longer than the width of the rectangle. And then that's where common sense comes into play. All right, hope that helped.